All right. So I'm not exactly sure what will come out and what wants to be said, but I wanted to tune back in because I posted a rather vulnerable share here about a month ago before I went into a silent retreat, the Death and Dying retreat in India, which I suggest all human beings go through. Uh, I found myself sitting in silence in a meditation center that has been like such a refuge for me of Buddhist teachings in Dharamsala, India. And the Buddhist nun that taught the course and held space has worked in hospice for 21 years, and she's been working with people that are transitioning between the life and death bridge. And the 9 days that I spent in the silent retreat were incredibly profound, and not just for the teachings on death and dying and understanding more the Tibetan views of the process of dying and the richness of that. But the understanding in those 9 days as I sat with myself and I was really battling, and not battling in a warlike way like I have in the past, but a very subtle, like tremoring kind of energy in my body, battling a discomfort, like really being uncomfortable in my body. And I shared that in my last video. I shared that I was feeling incredibly lonely and that I was struggling and there was this pain and this confusion that I was sitting with, this irritation, this sensitivity to the world around me, like a raw nerve, just a nerve ending open to the light of the day, to the temperatures, to the sound, and to so much. Like my senses just felt overwhelmed and still do to a point, but I'm adapting to finding grace in the amount of sensitivity that I'm feeling. But I guess what I want to share here is, my personal connection with death, my personal connection with the process of dying, and maybe even this video is going to be, a space for me to integrate some more because it's been a wild month. But what I realized in this death and dying retreat was that I kind of have been preparing my entire life for death. And that sounds like such an odd way to state it, but truly, since I was very young, most of my family members died. And I remember my stepdad dying when I was 10. It was really profound for me that cancer took his life, and he was the only father figure that I had ever known, and he was such an anchor for me, like such a teacher of love and compassion, and he never complained about his sickness, and he still was so selfless in his last days. He was my softball coach, and he loved me just like a daughter. He treated me with so much kindness, and he was one of the only real teachers at that time, besides my grandmother, who taught me such kindness. And I never saw him raise his voice or be unkind or be aggressive, and it felt so unfair that life was taken from him and he was only 34. And after he passed, and then my grandfather passed, who I also loved dearly, and then my grandmother passed, who was like a mother to me, all of these, and then my uncle passed, all of these happened within just a few years' time. And I remember feeling quite jaded by the process, about these people just being in my life one day and the next day being gone, and a big part of their transition being hidden from me because I was a child. A big part being veiled in joy, sending me away to, I remember I was sent away to my grandmother's when my grandfather died, and I was living with my grandma, and very joyously, living life when my grandfather died, and beside my grandmother the morning that she died, and also, pushed to leave the space as she was transitioning, and looking back on these and feeling like I missed an opportunity to experience something rich as a young child, like to understand what it means to detach from the most important and loving connection that we have in this life, our biggest attachment, which is our body. To watch the body like go into decomposition, really, and to become one again with nature is so incredibly challenging when we veil ourselves from it. It seems so foreign to think of a dead body or a decomposing body. And in this silent retreat, we meditated every day for on our decomposing bodies, on our last breath, on who would be at the funeral, on what our funeral would look like, where our things would go. We wrote out our wills, we wrote out where our possessions would go, we wrote letters to our loved ones, and any letters of forgiveness, things that we needed to say before we left. And it was incredibly powerful, and also it was challenging because I had gone through 3 years ago, and I've shared this before, this fear of my life coming to an end because of a sickness that I catastrophized in my body, and that I dramatized, and that I became a hypochondriac of, and this fear that this would be it. And that fear led me to like go into isolation, to stop eating, to stop sleeping, to really dysregulate my nervous system. It was incredibly unhealthy. And what I got to see in this 9 days was, and ironically and beautifully enough, like my yearly checkup was just right after this retreat. And I knew that. I knew that a time was coming where I was going to go to the doctor, and I was looking for certain news. And if I got other news, there would be fear coming up. And this time I sat with it. I sat with acceptance. And even in the seeing my own death and really meditating on it and experiencing it and like releasing the body in this metaphysical way in my mind, I accepted that if it were my last day, if it were my last week, that I've done a lot of what I wanted to do, and I've said a lot of what I wanted to say, and I've loved in a way that I wanted to love, and I've been loved in ways that maybe I didn't actually realize. And there was a feeling of, and a thought of, the worst case scenario. We were asked what would be the worst way to die, and I thought, in a foreign hospital where people don't speak the language, where all the people that I love are asleep on the other side of the world, and I can't get a hold of anyone, and no one's there to comfort me because they don't speak my language. And I thought, that's very possible with the life that I live. It's very possible. And is that so bad? Is that a terrible way to go out? And in that vision, I thought, and a nurse came and held my hand in it who didn't speak my language. And I thought, even in our last moments, we want certain people beside us, and we have an idea of what we want things to look like, but just human compassion, period, from whoever it comes from, can feel so rewarding and so fulfilling. And the nun gave us so many examples of what she's experienced in hospice over the last 21 years. And she said, there was this woman that died rather abruptly in her arms, and no one was there that she knew. And the nun looked at her and she just said, I will never forget you. And it just like, even now it like brings up emotion. She just said, I will never forget you. And I think for so many of us, like, we don't even think about death. We don't think that it's coming. We think it's something foreign. We know it intellectually that it will happen, but we don't actually sit with it as if it's a friend right beside us. And because of that, we rush through our days, we rush through our relationships, we rush through our connections, and we miss out on these opportunities like for such richness but still we're offered this grace, even in that moment when this woman was by herself, the nun was there to say, I'll never forget you. And wow, like what a gift that must have been. And so many beautiful synchronicities have been coming up. And one thing, that happened during this retreat in full transparency is like that old version of me that gets into panic when it's in fear. She came alive, but in a way different than she ever has. And I have this stuffed animal that is like my pride and joy for the last 3 years. And I found her. Her name is Spoon. She's a giraffe. I don't know where she's at, but if she's near, I'll bring her to you. And I found her at the end of one of my surgeries 3 years ago when I was really in my worst state, just very panicked and very alone. And she's a giraffe, which in nonviolent communication, this is the mascot for nonviolent communication. They call it giraffe language when we speak with empathy. And I found her at a time when I wasn't speaking nice about myself, and I wasn't speaking very kindly about a specific person that I felt was bringing a lot of pain into my life and wasn't there to support me. And this giraffe taught me how to speak more kindly and how to see all sides of things. And I took her on this retreat with me. And on the day that I was feeling it, the most fear alive, I knew that my screening was coming up. I was feeling that little fear that I felt 3 years ago of cancer and of what is going to be found, and will this be the connection to the end. And I had my little giraffe in my bed with me the night before, and I put her forehead to mine, and I just said, I don't know what I'd do without you. Like, I really don't know what I'd do without you. You've helped me so much. And here's this 38-year-old woman with her little giraffe giving it, this affirmation of so much power in her life. And the next day, again, into the meditations on decomposition and last breaths and planning out our funerals and our wills. And the fear was there. The fear was the most potent and alive of my test that was coming up. And I couldn't talk, and I was in silence, and my body was like anxious and rigid. And I went back to my room, and I opened the door in my little room in India, and a monkey had crawled through the window, and it had thrown trash all around my room and banana peels, and it had stolen my little giraffe. And I remember in that moment, with all the other signs that were coming and the symbols, I thought, oh, this is it. It's the end. I'm going to die. My giraffe has been taken. Life is taking it from me because I don't need it anymore. And this lasted for about 2 minutes. It was a very drastic, dramatic catastrophizing for 2 minutes. And then I recollected myself and I said, Echo, you're 38. This is a toy giraffe. You don't need your giraffe. You're going to be okay. Go back to meditation. And I detached, and I went back to meditation, and I sat through it in the evening. I went to bed alone without my giraffe for the first time in 3 years, and I released her. And in the next day, I was doing yoga on the roof of the ashram, and I had this vision that she was on the roof of one of the buildings, and I went and climbed up the hill so I could see onto the roof, and alas, there she was. And I got hoisted up, and I got my giraffe, and I thought, like everything is okay now. And the reason I tell this story is just life is so ironic and so magical and so weird. And I'm so grateful to have gone through this retreat. I'm so grateful to have given myself the gift of more discomfort. When I was in Japan, I had the opportunity to leave Japan and go to Bali or go to Sri Lanka and surf and do the fun things that I do and distract myself with joy. And instead I thought, you're like in another initiation, like your fear is coming up again. You're feeling flat, you're feeling dull, there's exhaustion, there's burnout. Like, go to where it begins. And a lot of it begins with this fear of the unknown. And so I'm so glad that I went, and I'm so glad that I stayed, even though on the third day I wanted to leave. I was like, this is not what I'm looking for. I wanted to be more silent. I want this and that. My senses were feeling so irritated. The people were irritating me, the sounds, the light in the ashram. And I went and talked to the nun, and I just said, is it possible to be angry with a nun? I was like, I'm angry with you. You know, there was a moment when she wasn't asking people to be more quiet, and we were supposed to be in silence, and people were asking a lot of questions during class, and I was getting so irritated. I was projecting onto this nun, like, you're not leading right, you're not doing it right. And then I was like, oh, Echo, this is on you. You're angry with a nun. This is your shit. Like, you need to sit with your shit. So I told her. I wrote a poem about it, and I stayed, and I started to participate. I started to be a part of the group and be present in a different way. And I learned so much, and mostly I learned of this fear of the unknown that exists in me, and I worked with it, and it's becoming more and more easeful each day. And now I sit in my flat in London, and I'm writing and reading and creating music and appreciating, like, just how special it is to be able to wake up each day and to have a body that allows you to walk and to eat and to sleep and to love and to connect and to be held and to hold. And I'm like falling in love with life in a new, deeper way. And there's nothing like facing death, even if it's just mental and it's not right here in the moment. It's always there. There's always the possibility. Nothing is promised, and that gives me chill bumps to say. And it's not to catastrophize or to be dramatic, but it's true. Like, I might not be here tomorrow. And if I'm not, that's okay. The world will move on, and beautiful things will happen, and sad things will happen. We will have moments of peak and moments of crisis, and the world will continue. But what's important is that I do my best each day that I'm granted to offer something to the collective, to be useful, to be helpful in some way, to ease suffering in some way that I can. And if that's just for myself, beautiful. But by easing the suffering for myself, it somehow gives people the opportunity to ease it for themselves as well. And so I know that I didn't do this retreat just for me. I did it for all things that I offer, to be a better teacher, to be a better leader, to be a better friend, to be a better lover. You know, I feel like I have spent so much of my life seeking to be loved, but not seeking to love. So many of us, it's like we want, and it makes sense, you know, we come from a place of lack in a lot of our childhoods, and so we need and we want. But I'm moving from a place now of like, I want to love, and to be loved, beautiful. But like, what a gift to love! What a gift to wake up and love the rain and love the sunshine and love to walk and love to run and just love to be in my body and to breathe and to eat and to make love to the world and to have the world make love back to me. So being closer to death, like really meditating on it and sitting with it and thinking about it and painting and singing and like drumming with the inspiration of that in between and that unknowing is inspiring my life in such a way that is different and unique to what it was before. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the gift of death in this life. And I want to be here for a very long time, to do work that's helpful and to have fun, to have joyous moments, and also to fucking have terrible, painful, brutal, like blood shrilling moments that show me just what is capable to feel in the human experience. So this is my update from my experience with the death and dying retreat in India. And if you haven't contemplated on this, it is not easy, but I encourage you to have a plan, because it doesn't matter how young you are or old, it can happen at any moment. And if it did, like, would people know what you thought of them? Would people know that you love them? Are there things that you haven't said? Are there things you haven't asked forgiveness for? Are there things that you haven't granted forgiveness for? Like, do your best each day to really to live as if tomorrow isn't coming, and to say all the things that you haven't said and do all the things that you haven't done, and not waste your minutes because nothing is promised, and write shit out. Where are your things? Who do you want to have what? I have a list now of who I want to have my drum, and who I want to have my Indian scarf, and who I want to have my little baby giraffe spoon, and who I want to have my guitar, and the things that I have. Maybe I don't have a lot, but they're precious. And I know that I am precious to many people, and that those things, having very little monetary value, have such a beautiful value of like togetherness and of love. And to write that out, it